Welcome to this week's episode of the Sports Biz Report powered by the Sport Management Student Union. Joined today by my panel, Greg Monforti presenting on sports marketing, Kevin Murray presenting on sports law, and Lindrit Skodra presenting on sports business. I'm Kevin Rossi and I'll be your host and presenting on sports media. Later in the show, we will be having an open discussion about Jason Collins' statement proclaiming that he is gay. Now for the roundup. In sports media this week, started off with Don Cherry, Canada's equivalent to Clyde Frazier in terms of wild suits, and analyst on Hockey Night in Canada. He said that female reporters should not be allowed in the male locker rooms. It's really interesting, though, that he would say this because he was also the first NHL coach when he was coaching the Bruins back in the 1970s to allow female reporters into the locker room. He actually had a chance later in the week to redeem himself and apologize, and he decided to stick by his comments. But the CBC said that they would not punish him. The NFL draft last weekend, despite its lack of star power, it raised its television ratings from last year. ESPN saw an increase to a little over 3 million viewers on average over the 3 days, and the NFL Network raised their average to 930,000. ESPN's was an increase of 4% from last year, and the NFL Network's was an increase of 23%. That could have been due to the star power slipping to the later rounds, but we're not really sure. This week, the Sports Business Journal released that the Pittsburgh Penguins are the most viewed team on television, earning an average rating of 12.6. This is the highest team rating in all of the four major sports since the 2002 Mariners. And earlier on Thursday, ESPN extended their media rights deal with the SEC until 2034, which is the longest media rights deal in sports. Now to Greg Monforti for marketing.
So one of the first stories I have for marketing is the Cubs owner, Tom Ricketts, threatening to leave Wrigley Field if he doesn't get what he wants. He was just approved for $500 million in renovations for the stadium and the land around, but he also would like outfield signage and a jumbotron. So the primary people that are against it are the rooftop club owners. There are 16 of them, and they give the Cubs 17% of their profits. This is part of their 20-year deal that lasts till 2023. They're upset over this because the signs that the owner wants to put up would block the view for the people there.
So those rooftops are bringing in $80,000 or so per game in tickets.
Oh,
so ticket merchandise and food sales. So that would be a big hit to local business. So it'll be interesting to see what the Cubs owners do.
Yeah, I think there's no chance he leaves. I think he's just all talk, trying to get what he wants, and I guess we'll see what happens. But I don't think it matters. He won't leave regardless.
We'll see if they call his bluff. It'll be interesting.
He doesn't have O'Brien's favorite term, leverage.
So the next marketing story. This year, the NBA set the record for gate revenue. They had a 6% increase from average per game gate revenue last year. They also had an 88% season ticket renewal, which is very high. Their total gate revenue, the numbers weren't released, but they said that it was over $1 billion, and 20 of the 30 teams increased their average per game gate revenue from last year.
That's very interesting now that MLB just started because they're seeing actually a huge decline in attendance. There's two teams, the Mariners and the Indians, that are both below 40% capacity on average, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting seeing the dynamics between the two sports, how NBA can have such a ridiculous year, then baseball comes up and these teams are not even making it to capacity at all. So the NCAA decided to ban Twitter hashtags and URLs on the field. They're trying to eliminate advertising from the field. This doesn't really make sense in my mind because most of the schools just write, like if it's Michigan, they'll write Go Blue, or they'll write whatever their school color is or team, they'll write hashtag Go whatever. So it doesn't even make sense. They're only advertising their school, but I guess it's related to them trying to not have Twitter be related to the NCAA, even though they have no affiliation.
It's a preemptive measure, I think, to avoid possible future sponsorship sales for on-field advertising.
I agree completely, but as of right now, they haven't done anything with it. But I agree they're looking more for the future, not for right now. And finally, the Jaguars with their new uniforms have yet to hit the stores. They haven't been able to sell any of the jerseys, and this would be the perfect time for them to do it after getting their draft class. This is also the only time that I believe anyone would want to buy a Jaguars jersey before the season. So the factory's really got to get it together, get these jerseys out so the Jaguars can actually take advantage of their new jerseys, of their new players, and start making some money.
Get your Justin Blackmon jersey.
The timing was very interesting. After the draft. Yeah, I feel like a release either after the first day or during the first day of the draft maybe would have been more appropriate.
You would have also thought as soon as they announced what their jerseys were going to look like, they'd start.
They would have been ready.
Yeah, but obviously they didn't set it up too well.
No.
All right. Thanks for marketing, Greg. Now over to Kevin Murray with Sports Law.
So going a little bit off of what Greg mentioned in the NCAAs, they also have put some of the deregulation that they announced in January on hold in terms of a few different proposals. One being that coaches would now have unlimited communication with their possible recruits for football. So that has been put on hold. Also, being required that the head or assistant coach be the head recruiting coordinator. So that's something that's going to be put on hold, which is interesting to see whether or not athletic departments go out and hire recruiting coordinators for this upcoming recruiting season in preparation for the 2015 football season. And finally, they would remove the restriction on print materials being sent to recruits, which isn't nearly as important as the previous two, but also something interesting to keep an eye on. Next, it's a little bit of a slow week in sport law, but we'll talk about Geno Smith, and he fired his agent 3 days after being selected by the New York Jets.
Unfortunate.
Unfortunate in many ways. It's interesting to me because his previous agent was at Select Sports, and maybe Geno Smith is looking at this as an opportunity. He's going to a huge media market in New York City, possibly going to be maybe even a rookie starting quarterback this year. Seeing the success that Russell Wilson had last year, RG3 had last year, getting huge deals, sponsorship deals. RG3 with Adidas being their really head face on their marketing campaigns. I would not be surprised to see him signing with a big name agency like a CAA or a Rock Nation even. Jay-Z has started this new brand in sports and has been signing New York athletes all over the place. Robinson Cano, who was the person he signed with the Giants? Victor Cruz, sorry.
Yeah, he just signed
Skylar Diggins, right? So it'll be very interesting to see where he goes from here.
Yeah, and with Geno Smith, I mean, obviously his motives for firing his agent aren't totally clear yet, but a lot of people tend to forget that an agent plays a huge part in the endorsement deals that a player brings in. So, I mean, that's just something to look out for in the future.
And also an agent, in terms of draft stock, there was obviously a reason why he was there on the first day in that green room when people weren't for sure that he was going to be the first quarterback, but there was talks he was going to go first. But you saw people like Matt Barkley, Ryan Nassib not being in that green room when they were being even talked about, late first round, early second round draft picks. So maybe there was some miscommunication between his agent and some teams that were talking about drafting Geno Smith in the first round, and now he's kind of pissed that he got blown off for first round draft pick and got that national embarrassment on national TV of having to sit there for 5 hours and not get picked. So that's something to think about.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that is 100% the agent's fault. I think that was a product of the draft class being not as good as it has been in the years with quarterbacks, so no one knew who was going to take him. I mean, I guess if they did miscommunicate to him, oh, you're going to be a first-round pick, we're going to pick you here, and the agent told him that, that's an understandable reason. But if he just kind of assumed he was going to be a first-round pick because he thought he was the best quarterback of the not elite quarterback class, I don't think that's necessarily the agent's fault.
Well, I'm fascinated by the fact that E.J. Manuel was at the draft because, in the prep in the prep week up until the draft, I mean, people were talking about E.J. Manuel, but nobody was saying he was going to be the first to go. That was nowhere. So the fact that his agent and his team were capable of clearly understanding that he was going to be picked, and having him there in the first round, it shows maybe in comparison to Geno Smith's agent that maybe their communication was not nearly as clear as E.J. Manuel's is with his agent and the teams that were looking at possibly drafting him.
We won't know until he just actually declares a reason for why he fired him, even though we can kind of assume. it's not being in the first round.
Right, and there's a 5-day period between when you drop an agent and when you can hire a new one. So we'll see within a few days, most likely, who he signs on with.
I would think Jay-Z would be the best choice being in New York. Jay-Z trying to get as many people in New York right now. I think Jay-Z knows enough people. He can get him the endorsements, and it would just be a good move for him going in his rookie year, sign with Jay-Z, get some good press. Having to be in New York, he's probably not going to get that much good press all season. Might as well get some good at the beginning.
Nothing like adding Jay-Z's name into the Jets talk.
It's just going to boost his ego, though, even more. So we'll see where his maturity goes from here. If he can go any further down, I'm not sure.
Is that all from me?
That's all from me.
All right. So thank you for that on sports law from Kevin Murray. Now over to Lindred Skodra for some sports business.
So recently, Rio Olympic Stadium closed due to roof problems, which is interesting because the stadium is located in Brazil, and it was actually due to be a host athletics at the 2016 Olympics, and it was closed down due to structural problems with its roof. Interestingly enough, the stadium was only built 6 years ago. What do you guys think about that?
It's fantastic because Rio was already behind on their building for the Olympics, so now this just puts them another venue down.
Yeah, I think as of the London Olympics this just past summer, they were something like 580 days behind on their construction. So, who knows what's going to happen with Rio.
Rio Mayor Eduardo Paz actually thought the same thing, and when asked at a news conference, he replied by not acceptable.
And that was already an issue in Rio in terms of hotel space, and that was one of their main issues going in. So they've done a lot of rebuilding in terms of hotel and living area for people coming to the event. So we'll see what happens.
It made me kind of wonder if the whole inspecting of the buildings, because there were so many days back, was kind of overlooked, or if it was just some type of freak accident that happened.
Yeah.
In other news, NFL is looking into the Russell Shepard claims, which for those of you that don't know, Russell Shepard was recently asked in an interview how he felt about not being drafted, when he responded saying he didn't care because he was signed during the draft. According to him, Chip Kelly called him in the 6th round and said they wanted him, but were down a pick after trading up for Barkley. Teams are allowed to contact and express interest to players during the draft, but are not allowed to negotiate any type of contract. Russell was highly recruited by Chip out of high school, but after making these comments, I think it's highly likely that he doesn't make the final roster. Ironically enough, during the interview, he was already talking about how he could help the offense when he released the news. Also, just as ironic, Chip Kelly is already breaking NFL rules.
You should have learned from Tiger Woods. Keep your mouth shut in the interviews.
Yeah, right.
All right, so that wraps up the roundup. Now we're going to move on to an open discussion about Jason Collins, who on Monday came out to SI and became the first openly gay player in the 4 major North American sports, which made quite the headline. So first, the public reaction to it was generally positive. So were you guys surprised at all by the public reaction, good and bad? What were your thoughts on that?
I don't think I was surprised by the public reaction. I kind of thought everyone would take it into open arms. No one would really have too much of a problem. I was more surprised with how some players reacted, some of the comments from the media that they said with Chris Broussard, with what Asante Samuel said today. Comments that were coming from players is what I thought people outside of sports would say, but obviously the people in sports are the ones that made the worst comments. But I don't see a problem with it. It was good that it was received so well, and I hope more people have the courage now to just keep coming out, and it's not a big deal anymore. It just becomes not a big deal anymore.
I think that the amount, although I do agree with you in terms of negative reactions in the sports world, I think the amount of positive reactions in the sports world, completely overwhelmed those negative ones. And you can see with the, horrible reactions that Chris Broussard has gotten through social media. He's just gotten tortured over the past 2 days. Although I don't agree with what he said, he was stating his own opinion. And though that's sometimes frowned upon in the media, it was a bold thing to do in the time period and in the situation that he was in. Everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Yeah, we'll get back to Broussard later on. And I agree with you guys. The public definitely outweighed or the positive definitely outweighed the negative. But especially the media and just the America in general, we love to hate, so we obviously focus on the negative. So, like, you guys touched a little bit on the fellow athletes. Are you guys surprised by, especially, like, Jason Collins is a very well-respected, over a dozen years NBA experience, a guy who works hard, does the little things to win. Are you guys surprised that, the athletes who came out with negative response didn't see that first, especially, being on team sports that you need players like that to win? Are you guys surprised by that?
I don't know, because I think that the people who are coming out negatively are also people who we're used to seeing, making headlines in the media. Asante Samuel is well known on social media as being somebody who's not afraid to speak his mind. So these people who are coming out and making these negative public statements, although they should be taking into consideration the whole team kind of idea behind it, it doesn't really surprise me, especially when we're talking about any NFL athletes. In the NFL, there's so much more of an individual mindset, especially in the skill player sections compared to the NBA.
No, I agree 100% with your statement on it's more individual minded, especially in football. Like basketball, you kind of have to work together. Football, you have to work together, but especially in a position like a cornerback, it all relies on you. It's just you. So I can see why he didn't care as much about those attributes and just focused on the fact that he came out and bashed it for his personal opinions, just like Chris Broussard did. But I don't know. I am a little surprised that they didn't focus more on his positive attributes and just focused on him coming out. But that was the most important thing of what he said. So I guess that's why that's getting more focused on than him as a player.
But you also saw a lot of, athletes who are, outspoken, and such as a Baron Davis, who is very well known for being kind of like a little crazy. I mean, he's a very solid veteran player, but he didn't even play this past season. But, he's a veteran in the NBA. He's well respected, but he's a little crazy with the media.
Didn't he estimate one year that like 80% of the NBA smoke weed?
He makes weird statements. Like that is very well documented. So the fact that he came out instantly with such, high respect for him after I think he played with him for 3 seasons. I think that is something to like really look at and see. There's such a difference between the NBA's response in terms of the NFL. And I also think that if you see, past conversation about gay players in sports, a lot of the backlash from it has been from the NFL athletes, which is very interesting. I just think generally in the NFL there's so much more of an ego than you find in the NBA.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And, you said how Baron Davis played with him and immediately came out in support. And in Jason Collins' statement, which he wrote alongside of Franz Lids at SI and was directed by John Wertheim, he mentioned the 3 degrees of Jason Collins because he's been in the league so long, played on 6 teams. It's like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Right.
Everybody's connected to Kevin Bacon in some way. So I mean, he's touched a lot of people directly, and I thought that the outpouring of support was fantastic. Especially you had guys like Kobe, who I'm in love with Kobe's Twitter feed, LeBron,
Meta World Peace.
Steve Nash.
Meta World Peace, Steve Nash, the NBA, which I guess we'll flow right into this. The NBA, I thought, did a fantastic job in handling it. They're especially on Twitter. Their first tweets were the NBA statement on it. All with the NBA family hashtag. And then they retweeted athletes throughout the day. They even retweeted Bill Clinton at one point. And then they ended with a retweet of Jason Collins' tweet of thank you later. So I thought that was a great way to be like, here's what happened, and then here's the end. And then they're kind of done talking about it. It doesn't really linger on at all.
I think the NBA, the fact that the first openly gay active player to come out in the NBA, it happened in the NBA, was the best league for it to happen in. They're the biggest on social media. I feel like the players are more active on social media, so it's a lot easier to see the positive reactions of what happened.
But it could have been bad.
It could, yes. It also could have went the opposite. Thank God it didn't. It went the positive way. But since it did go the positive way, it was good that the social media output was so great. Everyone could see it. People could see all the great things that they were saying about him. They could see him for being a good player, not just being the first gay player. They saw it from both ways.
Yeah, and the NBA has over 7 million followers on Twitter, so they definitely reach a wide range of people. So we talked a little bit about Chris Broussard. Mike Francesa had some comments about how it was just a worthless ploy to sell magazines. Tim Brando came out on Twitter. Tim Brando, the announcer from CBS, said that Jason Collins isn't a hero, and he kind of made a fool out of himself with all that. But back to the Broussard comments. We know his views. We knew his views before this even came out. What do you guys think of ESPN putting him out there, especially in contrast with an openly gay writer in LZ Granderson, and kind of creating this environment of debate on what's supposed to be their most journalistically sound show in Outside the Lines?
I don't think it was the right way of handling it. I understand that you want to get the debate. You should always have both sides of the story, have people, both opinions, but I don't think it was the right way to do it. Like Kevin just said, being on the show that's not supposed to be like that, that's more of like a first take kind of atmosphere. It should have been on a show like that where they go back and forth talking about it. But I also think they probably set it up on purpose to be like this because they knew his opinions from before. They knew what he was going to say. They kind of wanted to see where it would go from there.
But it's interesting because he was on SportsCenter all morning talking about this. And he didn't have this sort of reaction until later on when he got into more like a opinionated section of ESPN. When you get into the afternoon segment, it becomes like not news reporting, and it becomes, what's your opinion on the situation?
Yeah,
so
and
that's interesting.
I'm all right with it journalistically for ESPN to want to show side, a well-rounded side to the story, but it wasn't the platform for Bible thumping. You know what I mean? It wasn't the time to be pushing personal views on people. It was time for journalism, and what Broussard did was not journalism. And Deadspin's John Coblin wrote a great piece on Deadspin about this kind of idea about the embrace debate that ESPN has to it kind of filtering into its other shows. So it started at First Take, which ESPN has defended as purely entertainment, and we've seen it permeate through the walls of their shows into SportsCenter and now into what's their Emmy-winning journalism show in Outside the Lines. And I think that's where one of the biggest problem lies in this whole deal. So we'll take this into Jason Collins and him being a free agent and him being also not a very marketable player before. So what do you think this does to his contract status, and do you think this impacts his marketing at all?
I think it makes him, I don't want to say more marketable, but it definitely raises his chances of, I think, getting signed now. I mean, I'm sure that's not what his intention was. It just happened to coincide his decision with when he was a free agent. But I think it will help him get signed because he is kind of, like we mentioned earlier, he's been around for a while. He's played for many different teams. He's more of a role player than any chance of being a starter on a team anymore. So I think it raises his chance of being signed. I think it raises his chance of getting endorsement deals. Nothing major, but I think he has a better chance of getting some sort of endorsement deal out of this.
I completely agree. Being a basketball fan, he's always been a great defender and a great person to have on your team. He's always helped the teams that he's been in, even though he hasn't been on the greatest teams who've been successful in winning NBA championships. However, he is also getting to where I feel like he might retire in the next couple of years because he has been around for a while. I think this might be his 12th year.
I believe he's 13th. He's going into his 13th or 14th.
Okay. So, I mean, he has been around for a while, but, I mean, he has been playing well for the Wizards this year. So, I mean, I do agree that he will get some type of marketing out of this because of certain companies wanting to be able to market the first gay athlete to come out.
Yeah, and I think that we can all agree at least that we don't want him to not get a contract because he's gay, but we also at the same time don't want him to get a contract only because he's gay.
Right.
We want it to be because of the player that he is, and I'm sure that's the way that he wants it as well. So we'll end with this last idea of what does the future look like for LGBT athletes? What do you guys think?
I think from now on, with him being so brave and being the first active player to come out, that it's going to make it easier for players to come out more now. I think in the future, I don't know if this is going to happen because who knows if there will be a very big superstar that comes out. But I think if a player like that comes out in the future, I think that will really make it a lot easier for players in the future to come out because they'll see, okay, this guy's not afraid. He's one of the best players in the league, or he's a better player in the league. He feels like he can come out and say this. Why am I holding it in? I should be able to come out. So.
No, I completely agree. Having him, even Brittany Griner, who released it before, more people are going to like, oh, why can't I do the same thing? Why do I have to keep hiding? I feel like it would be the same type of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I think that seeing that the positive support clearly outweighed all the negatives to it will not push players, but it will show players that the world is ready for this and, there's no better time than now. So thank you all for joining us for this week's Sports Biz Report. Join us all next week on Friday. And in the meantime, check out the blog